Hi, Armand Diaz here from Integral Astrology with something new, and I think it's something exciting. It's a course on the I Ching. It's a 4-week course that will help you to access your intuition. I intend to do a few more things on tarot and numerology as part of a larger course on accessing your own intuition. I think it's great to consult astrologers. It's very good to consult astrologers about things. It's great to get somebody else's perspective, but it's also wonderful to learn how to access your own intuition, and I think the I Ching is a great place to begin. Now, the I Ching is a book. The oracle itself is a book. If you're learning about tarot, you can get a book on tarot. If you're learning about astrology, you can get a book on astrology, like this one. But the I Ching itself is a book. The oracle is a book. It's not too unusual to have books as oracles. People have used the Bible for a long time, sort of opening to a passage at random and saying, hey, what does this say, and how can I relate to that? In ancient Rome, they used to use the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid, and they would use it in the same way. They'd open it up to a random spot and look in and see what the passage said. On Facebook, I see a lot of things that say, turn to page 63 in the nearest book to you, and the second sentence says something about your love life. Okay, but the idea is kind of sound. If everything is interrelated to everything, it ought to be possible to read anything from anything. That's really, see the world in a grain of sand. It really is possible. There's many forms of oracles and divination. There's cloud gazing, and apparently people used to read chicken entrails and things like that. But the I Ching is a great oracle in part because people have been using it for thousands of years. There's a field built up around it. There's a lot of consciousness that has been put into this for a very, very long time. And so you have a kind of basis, a sort of shared field of consciousness that we've created around this book, and it makes it very, very easy to access. So I think that that's one reason for using it. The other thing is that although it's good to take time to consult the oracle, as it always is, it should be serious. It's a serious type of thing. It doesn't take very long, and it's not very difficult. Interpreting an astrological chart, that takes some time to learn how to do that, and it takes time to do it when you already know how to do it. It takes a lot of time. When you're looking at tarot cards, it takes a while to build up your experience with the cards so that you really know what's going on. But the I Ching is really very, very accessible from a pretty early stage. Many of us are very surprised by exactly how very obscure images somehow or another wind up being very, very accessible to us. So I want to talk a little bit about the various versions that are available, because if you're going to take the course, or even if you just want to know about the I Ching, it's good to know which book to get. So here's a few ideas for you. This is the Wilhelm Baines version of the book. It was translated from the Chinese by Richard Wilhelm, and then it was translated from German, which was Wilhelm's language, into English by Carrie Baines. And it is pretty much the standard book of the I Ching. It usually is sold with a gray book cover on it, but mine is long gone. I think actually I have a little I have a little bit of the jacket left over there. The introduction to this is by Carl Jung, and he was a friend of Wilhelm's, and he did a great job writing the introduction and letting people know about the I Ching, which he thought was very, very important. So this is a good version to get. This is a good version to have your hands on, and I would suggest having it even if it isn't your favorite version or your go-to version, in part because, again, we built a field around this. This was the first book that really made it into, the first version of the I Ching that really made it into Western culture. And so people have been working with it for a long time. When you read about people using the I Ching in the 60s, they were almost certainly talking about the Wilhelm Baines version. James Legge, Legge, I say Legge, but I'm not sure about the pronunciation, translated an earlier version, but it's generally agreed that he didn't know and love the I Ching very much, and so he sort of thought it was a book of magic spells. So this is a good one to have. It's a translation. The book itself was written in several different layers. When we talk about the history of the I Ching, I'll get into that, but it's written in several different layers, from the most basic hexagram or chapter heading in each of the different sub-chapters to commentaries on them. And really the main ones that are accepted are in this Wilhelm Baines version, and then there's a lot of other variations. A sort of similar but simpler version would be Brian Brown Walker's edition. It uses the images, but it talks a little bit about them in a little bit more modern way. The I Ching is an old book. It's been around for quite some time. Probably, well, the Chinese like to say 5,000 years, but I think that's kind of the Chinese for like a long time ago. So it's been around for a very, very long time, and so there's been many, many layers of commentaries put upon it, and there's many modern commentaries as well. So you kind of want to be able to stick to the original text as much as possible, although the original text, it's like reading Beowulf. Even in Chinese, it would be like reading Beowulf. It's hard. So you need a little bit of interpretation. You need a little bit of help. The Wilhelm Baines version is very Confucian in its outlook, but it's a little conservative, but it's very accepted. Brian Brown Walker's version is also a little on the formal side, but it's that's ancient Chinese stuff. It was pretty formal. The Rudolf Ritzema and Stephen Karcher book is a big one. Pound for pound, it's certainly worth the money. It does go into how each of the different words of the book has its derivation and meaning. It's an interesting supplementary book. It's rather hard to read because everything is put in the present progressive tense. So you reading, walking, hard. Stephen Karcher's Elements of the I Ching book is an interpretive book that is based upon the larger book. It is pretty good. It's a little repetitive, though. I'm having a little trouble sometimes seeing how one thing is different from another. In terms of a more new agey type of approach, Sam Reifler's I Ching is a great book. He scolds you a lot, though. You have to watch out. You get scolded a lot with this book, but he gives a little bit more modern interpretation while preserving pretty much the images that are presented in the Wilhelm Baines version. Then there are books that are really just interpretations. They don't present you with the images. They just sort of tell you what this is about. And that may sound very good. That may sound like that's what you want. You don't really want to read things like a crane crawling in the shade, or, the little fox crossing the water gets his tail wet. You may think, well, that's not going to help. Or the wagon wheel breaks. It turns out, those of us that use the I Ching a lot find that those somewhat obscure, very obscure images wind up being actually quite valuable. And often, if it says, the wagon wheel breaks, maybe there's going to be car trouble or something. So sometimes it's very, very relevant, and it's sort of an easy, obvious way to see it. So I would definitely get a book that preserves the images. But sometimes the interpretation for modern times is really quite helpful. One version is Sarah Denning's The Everyday I Ching, and it is a great book. She dispenses with the images, but she does talk about the hexagrams, the chapters, in a very accessible way. So you might want to look at that. And finally, the I Ching for Beginners by Mark McElroy is a great book. He got himself into the For Beginners series. There's a whole series of books that say For Beginners, I Ching for Beginners, Tarot for Beginners. You get the idea. It's not really for beginners at all. It's actually a very good book that is accessible. I use it a lot. It's one of my faves. So this is something to have. It also doesn't have the images, though. It's just interpretation. And I guess really finally, there is Thomas Cleary's Taoist I Ching. You might think that the Taoist stuff would be a little bit better than the Confucian stuff, but it turns out that the text that he was working from didn't see the I Ching as an oracle, but as sort of a book of philosophy. And I say, that's probably not what you want it for. And it's a little obscure and a little bit hard to work with that way. So the I Ching is a book. It is divided into 64 hexagrams or chapters. And when you cast the oracle, you get one of those hexagrams, one of those chapters to read. And then usually there are 6 lines, 6 additional little phrases that are associated with the hexagram, with the chapter. And you decide which of those, and then the oracle tells you which of those to go ahead and read. And then you look at a second hexagram based upon the changes. So you get sort of a lot of text, and sometimes just a little bit of text to read. And the real secret, though, is not in any of that. It's in interpretation. In part 2, we will talk about how to cast the I Ching and get a hexagram to work with. And I hope you'll join us for this.